an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Immortal Great Souls, Book 1, Bastion, chapters 42 through 44. In these chapters, Scorio manages to do something, to distract and earn himself a reputation. Is it earned? I would say probably. But damn, he's basically turning into Harry Potter at school. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Dan for commissioning this episode. Dan is in the chat saying, I have no idea how you keep so many stories in your head at all, because I started late due to stopping before chapter 44. And yeah, you know, Dan, I'm often surprised by my own capacity to keep this many stories straight. I'm not perfect, though. I definitely forget people's names, and we will come across that a little later in this very section. But I will say, I am very lucky in that mostly everything I'm commissioned to read or watch is so good that it maintains its own distinct atmosphere, and the characters are so specific that it's actually pretty easy to keep things straight because it all feels so contextual. And Bastion is no exception. It's a really, really specific vibe. So, first of all, I'm going to start at the beginning eventually, I promise, but I just have to talk about how surprised I am at the turn things take here, because, long story short, Scorio is admitted to the academy, and I just straight up never expected that he was going to get to go to the academy at all. I just really thought that was off the table for him. And I am, I really kind of appreciate this, because a lot of times, and I'm going to be talking about the sort of YA magical school trope, but I recognize that Bastion doesn't really fit into that. I just want to bring it up as an example of what I'm talking about. But so often when you have this sort of storyline where somebody's trained at a school for people who have certain abilities that others don't have, there is a sense of being immediately seen as, or feeling, not even necessarily seen as, but of feeling like you're being dropped into this entirely new world. And when I say you, I'm talking about the main character and what happens with them. Feeling very separated from the rest of the world sometimes, if it's a kind of thing like in Harry Potter where he's brought to a school that exists basically outside of the Muggle world in a lot of ways. And there's always a sort of excitement of a new place, but there's also a sense of real security with being there because you had a place there that was sort of predetermined. You know you belong, and you can trust that even if you run into cliques and people who don't like you, that you deserve to be here as much as anybody, and everything that comes to you is part of the package deal. And what I really enjoy about the way that this is set up with Scorio being kicked out first is that you don't take things for granted the way that you would reading a book where he starts off at that school and that's just all he does. You get to see sort of the injustice of the way the system is set up for him to be excluded for things that he doesn't even remember. And you also get to understand the level of luxury and privilege that these people are living, so that you have something very specific to judge it against. And I think that it's going to probably become more important as the story continues. The fact that Scorio lived in a way that most people at this school will never have to live. He had to scrape by. He had to constantly defend his life. He had to eat like the most basic of foods from a trough that everybody was eating from, and fight for every ounce of like the mana in order to ignite his heart. There is just going to be, this is just the natural way that things happen. If you are a person in and amongst other folks who have never known anything else, and you have only recently had a sort of come up, you will simply have an appreciation for what is around you that the other people cannot have. And that is not to say that they don't appreciate, because some people still do, but it won't be the same as someone who understands what it's like to not have access to any of this stuff. And I just really wonder how much that's going to play into his character as time goes on, because I know for myself, not only when I was in my original high school, where it was a town that sort of straddled the line between like lower class and upper middle class, and I was definitely one of the poor ones, and there was a lot of kids at my school. There were a lot of them that had a lot of money, and I felt that all the time. But when I went to school in California at that boarding school, the difference between my circumstances and the kids around me was even more stark, because the school cost $25,000 a year. I got in with a $23,000 a year scholarship. I was one of the only ones who even had a scholarship, never mind almost a full ride. And so my family, they were barely able to put money on the little card to get snacks and stuff at the general store, when my roommates and other friends in class and everything, they not only could get anything they wanted, but they could also go into town. They could afford to buy taxi rides and go to dinner at like restaurants in town. And I could never afford to do that. The only time that I ever did it was at graduation when my parents came. And there was just always this sense of being in a different, like living a different life than they lived. And there's no comfortable way to talk about that with people who have never experienced poverty. And I remember eventually being brought to my roommate's house because the only plane ride I could get home was a day after the school closed for the holidays. And so she let me sleep at her house. And it was this, it was a home in Bel Air, with this fucking driveway that was like a half-mile long, and the house was on this hillside with this pool overlooking the valley in LA. And I'll never forget standing there and just all of a sudden realizing, like, I am from a completely different world than she is. Her mother was, she had worked for Broadway her whole life, and her father helped to write the Doogie Howser show. So that is where that money came from. And it was just like I was an alien. It literally felt like we are not both the same species sometimes, because it was just unknown to her to ever have to wait for anything she wanted. And she wasn't spoiled. She actually was a great person considering the amount of privilege she grew up with. But it remains that she always, if she just named anything, she could have it. And I just, I don't think that necessarily that this story is going to be about class consciousness, but there has been so much about Scorio's, like, his resentment toward his friends, but mostly his resentment toward the system that was keeping him out for no good reason. And I can't imagine that just because he's in the school now that that's going to completely go away, despite the fact that things do seem to be resolved. But I'm going to put resolved asterisk, because there's just a lot of baggage that goes with that doesn't just vanish because you were let in the door. Dan says, yep, this was really surprising. Tucker is really good at this. Stuff doesn't happen in the way you expect, but not in the shitty Deathly Hallows exist, but you've never heard of them before kind of way. Yeah, look, I really enjoyed Harry Potter at the time. I loved covering it with Rashawn, but man, there's a lot of stuff in retrospect that I am just like, not awesome. both in terms of like problematic content, but also in terms of that is just sloppy writing. Credit to the parents. This is Dan again. If they are wealthy and their kids don't end up being entitled assholes. Yeah, like, you know, she worked really hard. She was a dancer. She really, like, tried to earn her spot, but it was always just there that there were certain things she would never have to worry about. So anyway, all right. Let's back up and start with the beginning of chapter 42, because we start out, it's really funny. In this section, we go from what feels like the climax of the book, and it's definitely not, but it feels like it should be due to the scale of the disaster we're dealing with. And then by the end of this section, we're just having some fun friends hang out in classes and meet the teacher sort of time. And it just feels like these chapters should be much farther apart and in the opposite order that they are. But I'm not saying that I have a problem with this at all, for the record. It's just really funny because I have an expectation of how these tropes are handled. And it never occurred to me, and this is something that, you know, I think I talk occasionally about how I am trying to write my own murder mystery. It never occurred to me that maybe something that could be surprising is taking tropes and just putting them in a different order than you expect. Because honestly, it really does mix things up quite a bit. And probably is challenging as a writer. Like, I have to imagine that the author just kind of sits and is just like, all right, how am I going to throw a little wrench into all of this? So we have the reminder of how everything went last time. The, you know, great souls that were supposed to be dealing with Imogen have all been frozen in this fog. And, fucking Scorio, he inserts himself into the situation. She recognizes him, and she has this confrontation with a man called Soul, who is apparently her ex-lover. She says he's her husband, but I think I've been calling him ex-husband because it feels very much like that is true, according to him, if you were to talk to him. But yeah, the way that this goes is that Imogen decides, I'm going to get back at Soul by destroying Bastion. And what I like to imagine here is that she is acting with an entire city full of people the way that an angry girlfriend with a real petty heart would trash a man's, like, prized Corvette. That's sort of the vibe here is, you know, she doesn't care about the car. It's not about the car. She just knows he loves it. And so she decides she's going to key it up and cut up the leather seats and slash the tires and bash in the windshield. And it's just for the fun of seeing him in pain, which is really, like, considering the amount of human life taken in this, like, little, I'm just going to call it a tantrum. It's pretty fucking horrifying that she's capable of what she is. So what she's doing is she is just like transforming the city around her, doing that thing that she did with the dome of the building where all the beers are, and making the architecture sort of invert on itself and move and develop like new balconies and spires and doorways and stuff where there weren't any before. And so later on, we find out that there are like sections of people's homes where doors disappeared or walls melded together and folks are locked inside and there's no way to get them out. Just a lot of people caught up in the mix of this, while she's just treating their houses like pretzel dough and just tying them in knots for the fun. And the whole, like, the way that she sort of tries to frame this conflict between her and Soul is that she is personally more powerful than him, and that he has such a fragile ego that he is, like, hateful toward her now because of it. And it's so funny because, like, you can be right about men having fragile egos and not liking women to be stronger, but you can also be a psychopath who's doing this kind of crazy shit. It's not about that girl. I have no doubt that there are men out there like what you're talking about regarding great souls. I also that's not the problem. Like, come on, join us in the real world. But no, the whole point is that she is addled and she can't quite join us in the real world. So, long story short, because I'm going to kind of get to the point here, is that she winds up going up against Soul, and it's pretty clear that she's winning. And there is just a point where they're sort of pressed up against each other with their power, trying to out-push one another. And she is so incredibly focused that Scorio is like, all I have to do is one tiny little thing, and it will fuck her up enough that I can help. And it's really giving like one of the first scenes in Cradle, which I won't get into too much, but if you know, you know. Because he is like trying to summon everything he can. He has this vial that has all this mana in it that he decides he's going to utilize right away. And he's burning his heart for power. He's doing the utmost. And when he goes up against her scepter, it didn't even quiver. Horror drenched Scorio like a massive bucket of frigid water. His gaze darted to Imogen, whose own narrowed glare flickered for just a second to meet his own. And in that moment, that briefest of contact, he saw shock, disappointment, and confusion. The barest flicker, so transient, he might have missed it, but the distraction was enough. And Soul is able to finally, like, beat her back. I love the fact that she's, like, disappointed, like, Scorio, man, I really thought that we were on the same page here. And there's a line later on from this girl that Scorio meets from the school where she says, like, Imogen has lost her compass. And by that, she basically means, like, conscience, her moral compass, you know. And I wonder if this is the sort of thing that can be undone, or if there's a flicker of the compass remaining, and Scorio doing this, like, kind of tapped into it a little bit, or if it's just too late, if Imogen is just completely gone. I have to assume that she's completely gone, because what she's doing is so drastic and horrible. But, I don't know, maybe not. So, eventually, she is defeated and disappears. Soul had tried to sort of, like, you know, crush her, but she creates this sort of portal and manages to fly through it. So she's still alive somewhere, but she's not here, and she's not fucking up Bastion. And it looks like about 30% of the city is so dramatically altered that it's going to be a massive, like, the job of cleaning up is likely going to last years. So at this point, Soul lands in front of poor Scorio, who has drunk way too much mana and has used his heart and has damaged it. And Soul, who is an Imperator, says, "You've damaged your heart, both before and now. It seems you will never learn moderation." I love this. He recognizes him and knows exactly what the fuck this guy is about. And he says, "Your abuse has weakened the foundations of your soul. As you are, you'll never advance beyond Tombspark." And Scorio is like, "Well, you know, I'll figure out a way around that." And Soul says, "No doubt you would, but you've earned better." And he heals his heart. "I've returned your heart to the way it was before Imogen paid her visit." And he says something about how, like, not he being Soul, Scorio says, "Thanks, though I fear it won't help me in the long term since I'm a red lister. They won't let me, you know, train with them." And Soul is like, "You know what? You've got a lot of talent, and I don't think living in the fucking ruins is the way to go for you. I'm going to talk to them and get you in there." And Scorio is like, "Holy shit." And then is like, "Okay, look, I really hate to press it, but do you think you could help my friend Naomi out also? Because she has been ostracized as well. She finally left because they were treating her so poorly." And he agrees to talk to her. And later on when we see her, because I sort of wondered this, she clearly like wants to be at the school and wants to get the training, but is very resentful of the way it happened. She's the kind of person who's just sort of, she's angry enough, I think, that she has determined to take a bad outlook no matter what happens, even when it's her heart's desire. Honestly, she's the type of person that I feel, especially when it is her heart's desire, because nothing is as scary as getting exactly what you have been wanting for years. It's terrifying, especially when what you have been wanting isn't like, you know, a state of being so much as an opportunity, because then you have the possibility in front of you of fucking it up, of wrecking it, of squandering it somehow. And so I could understand how flipped out she is in a lot of ways, even though it's very frustrating and a little infuriating to see the way that she behaves. I kind of get it. So anyway, he asks, like, do you think there's anything that you can tell me about my past? And I almost forgot. Sol says Imogen's, the loss of her heart only unfettered her already terrible power. And Scorio says loss of her heart. How? I mean, and then he switches over to, can you tell me of my past? Because I wanted to know about how you can lose a heart. And he starts to ask that, but then gets distracted. And I was just like, dude, stay on point. I get that you want to know about your past, but the likelihood of him telling you about that is much lower than him telling you about how you can lose your heart. And I wanted him to stay focused, but he does not. Sol says, there's much for you to relearn. I trust you will do so quickly. Perhaps in time we will meet again, deeper in hell, and then we will speak at length. But for now, you have my thanks. That will have to suffice. Dan says, remember Naomi's conversation about burning your heart up? Oh, it's just that. Okay. For some reason, saying, like, the loss of her heart made it sound like something occurred that stole it from her, rather than she chose to do something that burned it up. It sounded like the language was passive enough that I thought it was not due to her own actions. But, okay, so she used up her soul or her heart for power, more than likely, and fucked herself for it. Well, that's terrifying. Watch out for that, Scorio. So this is when the White Queen shows up, and he gives her his instructions. Sol gives her his instructions about him. I keep just using pronouns, and I'm sorry, I know it's confusing. About Scorio rejoining the school and setting that up. She is very kind to Scorio and has this sort of warmth to her that makes me wonder if she's like romantically interested in Sol. There's like a vibe from her. And it seems like she's very disposed to be extremely kind and pleasant to anybody that Sol approves of. So Scorio is carried by the White Queen back to the rest of the group who has come out of their, mind control state. And this is so funny because Praximar, he's in the midst of giving everybody orders, and they're perfectly reasonable. But as soon as he sees that Scorio is with the White Queen, he starts apologizing for her having to deal with this kind of filth. I had him cast through the final door, but like the worst of vermin, he found a way to survive. And she says, Sol told me himself that Scorio was instrumental in helping him defeat Imogen. And Praximar is like, what? Hold on. And she says, Sol asked me to express his gratitude for your readmitting Scorio to the academy. I love the way that's worded. It's not like Sol has asked you to readmit him, because he doesn't have to ask for shit. He's an Imperator, and what he wants happens, and that's just a foregone conclusion. So it's thanks you for readmitting. It's already happened. I appreciate it. And God, that's such that's the kind of language that I really want to learn to incorporate in my life as far as the things that I want and just demanding them. It's sort of like an affirmation of just treating shit like you already have it. But there's a weird moment here. For a moment, tendons stood out in Praximar's neck as a shudder ran through him, but Scorio could only marvel as the man mastered himself so smoothly that his subsequent smile appeared almost natural. Is that so? Then I must admit to having been mistaken. Of course I will be glad to honor the Imperator's request and to welcome Scorio back to the Academy with all honors. Praximar turned now to Scorio, his eyes warm, his smile rueful. It would seem that I am becoming one of the aged and inflexible fools that I once scorned in my youth. I apologize, Scorio. I did not recognize your worth and allowed myself to be blinded by your being a red lister. We would be honored if you returned to the Academy. I cannot remember the last time a young great soul had earned the gratitude of one so respected and admired as Sol the Just himself. And Scorio is just like, oh my God, I really can't tell. Does he mean this? I could swear he doesn't, but this is a very convincing performance. And God, I don't believe him, but I want to so bad. Especially the line, I have become one of the, aged and inflexible fools I once scorned in my youth. It feels like that sentence has so much self-awareness in it. But I believe it's a sort of thing that a person who has learned how to act like everybody needs them to act would just practice and keep in mind for certain situations to be self-deprecating and get people off their guard. I just don't buy it. And I said, I really want to. There's a big part of me that's just sort of trying to have an open mind and be like, maybe Praximar is not a complete piece of shit. But honestly, the way that he sucked all the mana out of Scorio's heart before throwing him in the door, and how angry he seemed a second before he was able to turn it off, I just think that this is an act and he has just learned how to perfect this. And it would make sense, as somebody who has the kind of abilities that he does, that self-control would be paramount among them, and that he is able to present whatever emotion he needs to at the time. But it's really a bummer because, like I said, I just want so much for this to be a real moment for him, you know? Anyway, so then there's the mention of Naomi. He doesn't even remember her. But he's like, well, if she's going to return, then yeah, I'm sure she'll just contribute to the school. If it's his judgment that she come back, she'll be an asset, of course. So Praximar says, after she leaves, her name is Nova. I keep calling her the White Queen, but Nova is her actual name, and I really like it, and I want to keep using it, so I got to remember it. But Praximar says, what a change of events. We've had a terrible start of things, Scorio. I hope you take my apology to heart and allow both the Academy and myself a chance to change your opinion of us. And Scorio studied the man. His smile was sheepish, his expression chagrined and rueful both. Was he genuine? He had only to squint, and he saw the older man as he was in the holding cell, cruel and cold and filled with disdain. And that's exactly it. Thinking back, I'm not trying to say people can't have a bad day, because you can be a good person, a decent person, and be cold and cruel and disdainful, and still be a good person, and you had a day where you really were not your best self. But I don't feel like that's really what happened here. I think likely Praximar just realized, I am not going to fuck with somebody who has the protection of an Imperator, and that's how he views it. I'm not sure that's exactly what's going on, that Scorio has the protection of an Imperator, but I'm sure that's what it looks like. And it's likely best for you and your health to just not fuck with that. So, at this point, Praximar says, Exero here is a flame spark. I'm putting him in charge of you and Famissa. And they have to go out into the city and deal with some of the chaos that has erupted. Exero proved to be a pale, lanky youth with a rough mane of white hair. I kept trying to picture him, and I can't quite do it. Like, for some reason, the image that keeps popping into my mind is, oh my God, the guy who played Timothée Chalamet, says Dan. Not for me. Timothée Chalamet is somebody that I think of for not one, but two characters in the Red Rising series. But for some reason, for Exero, I'm seeing Adam Driver. And I think it's just because of this sort of like the vibe of him being patient, and it seems like trying to be kind, but also just fucking having a disdain for people that is described later. I was just like, that, I don't know, that energy hits for me as Adam Driver. But there's a moment here where it's still not quite hitting, but Scorio is trying to let himself like really soak in the fact that he's part of the academy now. I'm going to mention later on, Scorio comes back to the room with his friends, and they both were told to stay the fuck in their room out of the way. So part of me kind of wondered if Scorio was sent out into the city with there being a goal of taking him out of the equation. If Praximar made an exception for him just to try and take him off the board. But we'll talk about that in a moment. So they have to go into the city. Long story short, the city is fucked up. And people, there's just wailing, people screaming at each other. And I really appreciated the descriptions of the chaos here, because I feel like it's the sort of thing that is so waved off when, and this is kind of an effect of the Marvel movies, that a massive fight will take place in the center of Manhattan. And once the bad guys are beaten, we just kind of move on with our lives, and there's no real dealing with the fallout of an attack like that, and the number of people who would be dead, and the amount of damage it would cause, and how it would render huge sections of the city utterly useless for like months until things were fixed, and probably like subway lines would just be shut down, and the whole city would come to a screeching halt. And I've always been somebody who, you guys know that I'm a big fan of like logistics. And I've always been somebody who's been fascinated in that part of things. Like, what is it like to be a person on the ground who has to deal with what's going on because of superheroes? And, you know, there's been various takes on this, but they never really focus on what I'm interested in. It's always sort of like, oh, well, what if a superhero like killed a person that you loved? Or, you know, it's always a very personal story, rather than what if you were just an ordinary folk and background to somebody else's story, and what is it like to live in that sort of environment, you know, where you know that like just the will of one person, they have such power that they can just sort of unmake your life. But the whole vibe here is just one of true like despair, honestly. So Scorio leads the way to his ward. He says our ward. And when they get there, it says everywhere he looked, he saw the price Ward 4 had paid. Buildings along the square's left edge were practically unrecognizable, turreted and balconied into oblivion, with one having sunken and rotated so that its roof now pointed across the square at the opposite building, as if the whole edifice had chosen to take a bow. Worse was the long line of the dead whom the locals were covering with sheets. Over 40 bodies lay in a row, the great dashes of blood spattered across the paving stones, a testament to how violently they died. This is the shit I appreciate, man. Like, you're not telling me that you fight with a bunch of aliens on Fifth Avenue and 100 people aren't accidentally killed as just fallout from that. And that is a lot less fun to see on a screen. So I get why we don't do this, but I think it's sort of interesting. And what happens here, Scorio tries to get everybody's attention. They ignore him because he looks like shit. And Xero winds up standing up and calls out. And then when he gets their attention, the first thing is a woman coming at him. And it says her hands gleaming crimson. So I am assuming she was just dealing with somebody who died really horribly. And her rage is understandable. And she just comes at him hard with, "Where were you?" "Who was that?" another man shouted hoarsely. "One of your imperators? One of those that failed to deliver on the prophecy? Half the city ruined, and what did you do? Took you long enough. What'd you come here for? Demand more taxes from us? Can you heal? Please, help my son. Down with the great souls." This last rang out with terrible intensity, and a young woman with a shock of crimson hair, whose eyes revealed her brutalized soul, staggered forward. Down with the great souls, down with the oppressors. The crowd hushed, many turning in alarm and horror to stare at her, but the woman was so far gone that she did not care or see. Where did Scorio know her from? Her stark features, her blazing eyes, he knew her, but she looked different. I am really, really worried that this is one of the original two women that he met. I don't think so, but I'm really worried. And I don't know, maybe not, maybe not. I feel like if it were one of them, her actual name would have been said. But he knew her, but she looked different. I don't know. Like, I'm trying to think of how many women he's actually come into contact with. And the only one that I can think of is Dola. Maybe, there's another woman named Kayla that he sees at the school later that works for Dola. But I'm going to be honest, you guys, I do not remember Kayla, like, at all. Her name didn't ring a bell, nothing. So I don't know if this was her, but I feel like if he saw her at the school, it would have been mentioned, oh, she was the one in the crowd. And this was a moment where I kind of, looking back, was like, is she a plant by Praximar to try and rile the crowd up? But she's too much about down with the great souls in general. It doesn't feel like it makes sense. If she were targeting Scorio specifically, then that would be much more suspicious. But she seems so deeply, truly upset. And what she is saying would threaten Praximar also. So I'm just going to go ahead and think that this woman is just legitimately really upset and just feeling a way about everything. And I can't blame these people for feeling like this. All of the great souls are living in the lap of luxury. They get to go home to their school that's like untouched, basically, and swim in this pool and experience this, like, it feels like they're in a pocket world, you know? And meanwhile, these folks are still left in the fucking wreckage. And I just really, the thing to do would be to open up the school to the people who now have been displaced. But it doesn't seem like that's even on the table. But eventually they start to, like, really act up, and it looks as if Scorio or Xero is going to get violent with them. And Scorio decides to take matters into his own hands, and he yells, "Cowards. The dying need our help, and you think only of your pain? Think of theirs. This isn't the time for your grievances. This is the time to work together, to save loved ones, to do whatever we can to help the wounded." And I really liked this. Like, basically, he's like, if you guys have a problem with us, we can fucking deal with that later. But right now, folks are actively dying. So can we just put this to the side for right now? Who needs our help? And then all of a sudden, lots of people are talking about folks being trapped. My son threw himself out a window. Both his legs are broken. I can't find Yvette. He was in the basement with his fire moth. The door sealed over. I can hear them screaming inside. And so there is a lot that they need to do. And he watches Exero, and it says, Exero possessed a deep level of patience tinted with mild contempt, while Famissa was prone to letting her temper flare only to quickly forgive or move on. They worked hard, and when second rust gave way to second clay, Exero decided they'd done enough. Weary, they walked back in silence to the academy. Scorio's elation had long ago given way to a numb sense of muted horror, which now gave way to nothing. Nothing was so strange as to walk north as the sun wire went dark instead of south. So here comes a very funny thing, because Famissa is like, so I hear that you helped take down an Imperator. How is that even possible? And Scorio tells them the truth. He's just like, I barely managed to distract her, and it was enough. And Famissa's like, you distracted her. How? And he says, I pushed up against the thing that they were holding. Exero says, ferula. Let's see, where is it? Oh, here it is. 8 years ago, that's when the Imperial is spelled weird. Prophecy said we'd close the pit, right? Right, said Exero, growing even more subdued. Didn't happen. Not for lack of trying, though. Famissa crossed an arm over her chest to grasp her other arm. You've obviously seen how the ruins are growing, right? Well, the Celestial Prophecy was dug up maybe 40 years ago to address that. Is that the term your instructor used, Cinder? Asked Exero, his brows lowering. Dug up? Famissa stared defiantly at him. Fine. Miraculously discovered. And I couldn't tell what the deal was here. It sounds like she is sort of saying they just invented a fake prophecy, and he's trying to act like, no, that was a real thing. And she's mocking it by saying miraculously discovered. I don't know. But there's clearly a lot about this prophecy that is still to be discovered. But yeah, this is when she mentions Imogen's compass being gone. She's appeared randomly ever since to destroy our holdings. Our holdings? Yes. Us being the great souls, we have different houses, but we're all united against the fiends. Got it, said Scorio, to emphasize that he did. Famissa was unabashedly staring at him. How did you distract her? I, punched her ferula, I guess. They walked in silence for a dozen steps, both simply staring at Scorio incredulously. You punched her ferula, you guess, repeated Exero at last, his tone somewhere between amazement and mockery. That's insane. I mean, that's the kind of thing I'd imagine a Blood Baron or Charnel-Duke doing, not a... What are you? Cinder? Wait. Exero came to a stop. You're bleeding Cinder? Well, I was bleeding earlier, but I think I've healed up since then, said Scorio, trying for a wry smile. Get it? No, I get it, said Exero, moving forward again. Just not sure I believe it. Oh my god, this is so funny. The two of them are just like, something's up with you. Something's wrong with you, man. And Famissa is just like, what's your handle on Instagram? She is all ready to slide into his DM. She is into it. She's so disappointed when she finds out that he already has friends at school. Because she's like, I'll show you around. I'll let you into my group. And she's just wanting to be proprietary of him. And it feels very much to me like this is a romantic interest. It could just be the opportunity of it, like her networking and being like, oh my God, here's a really good contact to have. But I think she wants some of that dick. And that's just my opinion. So yeah, she is definitely going to be sliding into his DMs And I bet there will be some real scantily clad photos in the mix there. Go, girl. I mean, you know what? Shoot your shot. I don't feel like any of the women that he is like spending time with, it doesn't seem like he has interest in them romantically. So I feel like you've got a shot. But I also feel like Scorio does not seem like a guy who is going to be interested in anybody romantically, because he does not have time, because he is a single-minded maniac. And that's just my take. Unless fucking can be construed as training, which for all I know, if you try and like saturate your heart mid-stroke, that probably takes a lot of concentration and maybe would be helpful to your overall game. I don't know. Anyway, lots of questions now. So this is when he goes to see Lianshi and Leonis, and they are so excited to see him. And he finds out about how Naomi was approached, and she agreed to come even though she's sort of trying to act like she didn't have a choice. But it comes out that she did, and she was given a choice. We pried it out of her. We've been here all afternoon. And the way that this goes is so interesting because, like, they want to hear the story, and Scorio is in the midst of, like, trying to tell them, but then he stops and is like, Naomi, do you really not want to be here? And she says, I don't want to go back to the ruins. Leonis cupped a hand to his ear. What was that? I didn't hear. Can you say it louder for those of us in the back? Naomi rose to her feet and in a blur shifted up to her nightmare lady form. And despite his familiarity with that dark, emaciated shape, her lipless maw, her burning green eyes, Scorio felt his stomach clench as her bladed tail rose to orient on Leonis. Careful how far you push me, she hissed. Leonis, however, spread his arms open wide. Right here, O dread Emberling, pierce me through the heart. And she shrinks back to herself, and Leonis is like, look, if you want to be a part of our group, we would love to have you. But you can't be throwing your weight around and whipping out your killer tail and threatening us every time you're a little pissy about the situation. And Lianshi tries to take a little bit more of a friendly, encouraging tone in keeping Naomi in their group. But Leonis is very, in my opinion, coming at it more in a way that is going to resonate. Because I think Naomi will benefit from Lianshi's sort of softening influence, because Lianshi is much more kind in an overt way than Leonis. I think Leonis is just as kind, really. But his kindness is... he shows that in teasing and bluffness, you know? And I think it's indirect enough that Naomi is probably more comfortable with his way than Lianshi's way. Because I feel like she wants and needs friends, but she can't admit to herself that she wants and needs friends. And so him being keeping just enough distance with it makes her feel like it's less of a risk than somebody like Lianshi, who is very much like, we are friends and I will hug you now, you know? And Scorio is like, look, I get it. It's scary, but I really want you here and I really don't want you to leave. Just try it out. And she's like, all right, fine. And then Scorio's like, okay, let me tell you guys a story. And Leonis stops him and is like, no, hold on. And he says, what's wrong? And Leonis is like, we don't tell stories out here. First of all, you look like shit. Second of all, you smell like shit. Third of all, you really look like shit. So let's go on and get in this tub and just have a nice little soak. And you can tell us a story in there. And they get in there, and I just loved it because you guys know how much I have been waiting for Scorio to get to soak and clean himself up, like, really. I was so bummed when he didn't go to that fucking bathhouse. And finally he gets to just sink in above his head and just luxuriate in it. And I loved it so much. It made me want a deep soak bath as well. And it feels great. And he is just like, God, I can't believe I'm here. This is amazing. Like, just so appreciative of the whole moment. And Lianshi says that there are 2 rooms available in their little, their little section. So they each get their own room. And Naomi is talking about the pool, and she says, I never had one of these when I was here. I had a single room off the servants' quarters size of a supply closet. And I am really, really excited to see where this all goes for Naomi. She tells them, having me in your group will make things harder for you. And I'm curious whether that's actually true. But I also feel like, and Leona says this, but we've got Scorio on our side, and he's going to be getting a lot of adulation and attention. And I sort of felt that way. Like, as soon as she said that, I was like, maybe it'll be balanced out, But I don't know how many people are even going to feel a way about her. How many people were even here when she was here and went through what she went through? I don't even know if any, like the teachers maybe, but otherwise, I don't know. And Scorio, for his part, is just like, I just want to train. I don't want all that attention. Leonis is like, well, that sucks for you then. I don't know what to tell you, but you went out after an Imperator, and that's just going to do things to your name. So maybe you don't want to be doing things like that then. But yeah. He tells them the story, and then we leave that scene, and chapter 44 says, the rest of that 8th day cycle was chaotic and atypical. Classes were suspended as students and instructors were directed to help establish order across Bastion. Scorio and his friends reported each first clay to one of their instructors and were given orders for the day. Often this involved liaising with house and operatives and guards to help clear away rubble, demolish intrusive new architecture, or project force and authority to help calm the populace. Scorio loved it. Even when the work was drudgery, even when his shoulders ached from swinging a sledgehammer for hours or clearing collapsed buildings by hand, his sense of elation never quite left him. For at each moment, he felt a new sense of belonging. Not having to hide, not having to duck his head and turn away from officials, to be able to stand side by side with his friends and laugh and tease each other as they crossed the city, to be seen and acknowledged as a great soul. It remained novel and invigorating no matter how many days passed. The best part was when they returned to their quarters each evening. And yeah, of course it would be, because that pool sounds fucking awesome, and I want one. And he has his moments of just like, God, I can't believe I'm here. Only one event jarred him during that first week. And this is the mention of how he sees Kayla. He'd spotted a head of gray hair, a sturdy frame, and turned to see Kayla from the double, moving purposely along the far side of the chamber. And the double is where he met Dola. And Kayla, she has tattoos all over her, so apparently she's very distinctive looking. I don't know how she gets in the school, if it's like she pretended to do a delivery the way that he did that one time. I don't think she's got powers, so, I do not know. But it says he'd known it was her, a chill washing over him as he'd hurried to place the fountain between them. She'd not seen him and rapidly disappeared down a hallway, merging with the crowd. For a long moment, he just stood there. And he asked somebody, where does that hallway lead? And somebody says, like, a lot of places: instructors' quarters, executive suites, meeting rooms, council chambers. And in the basement levels, you've got your more exclusive cellars, storage rooms, treasure vaults. So it could be any number of things that she's doing here. And I am kind of feeling like maybe Scorio should have reported that he saw her wandering around. But I don't know if that would have done any good, because he has no real, like, accusation to make, And eventually, 8th day comes, they go out to dinner, and they, like, this really cracked me up. Of course, Leonis is described as master of the revel. He's buying food and drinks for everybody, summoning musicians inside, just really playing everything up. And they are really sauced. And there's a point here where it says, the sweet's lights glowed to life of their own accord at far too early an hour. And I, being the dodo I am, read that and thought, why are the lights coming on earlier than usual? And then I realized it just meant like, no, they're hungover, babes. That's all it is. So they wake up and Scorio has decided that he is just going to do the thing where you just push yourself despite being somewhat hungover. I think Leonis probably got a lot drunker than he did. But they have to go to their morning run, 5-mile run. And there's a mention of how the two people who always win are what is her name? Jova Spike and Ravenna. Can't remember her last name. They apparently have a rivalry that they are not even trying to hide from anybody. Like, everybody is aware of this. And the way, of course, that Scorio comes in is he thinks Ravenna Accardi, that's her last name. He's like, why don't I just try and beat him on day one? Which, of course, he thinks that. But I really enjoy the way this goes, because what happens is he is running, and I love Leonis just being like, I'm going to stay over here against the wall and just try and get through this. If you want to like really run, be my guest. I am not doing that. Again, Leonis, I just really feel like I feel seen, you know? But him and Naomi, like Scorio and Naomi, are like, you know what, let's fucking do this, though. And she eventually says, I can't go much faster. Do your best, he said. And as he pushed himself, the very act of running began to feel effortless, as if it would be harder to stop now than to go faster. His body seemed to fade away, and with it, his awareness of his breathing, his tempo. The world reduced itself to his feet impacting the ground, his mind crystal clear, his body strong, his being driven, energetic yet strangely relaxed. It felt as if he were floating, his body surging and perfectly in harmony, capable of devouring endless miles, of outrunning anything and anyone. And I do not know what to think of this, because he is overtaking everybody. And he's feeling himself because he pulls up next to Ravenna and Jova. They see him and they're just like, oh, it's like that. And then as he passes them, they catch up and they are ignoring him utterly. They speak to each other and just say, ready? And they somehow went faster, smoothly pulled ahead of him, running so swiftly the balls of their feet barely touched the ground. Scorio scowled, dug deep, tried to keep up, but they seemed to glide ahead effortlessly, going so quickly he had no choice but to give it all he had, let loose with the last of his reserves, and for a glorious second he began to catch up again, was going faster. But then a deep cramp stabbed into his side right under his ribs like a knife sliding home, and his euphoric sense of invincibility began to crumble. I don't know if this is just an exaggerated Great Souls version of like that endorphin rush that you get when you've been exercising, which is very real, by the way, and there is nothing like it. It is the best feeling. But he is so fucked up. He barely makes it the last lap. It's bad. And he winds up just like crashing to a halt and gets passed by a bunch of people. He could now only struggle along, losing momentum, till the last of the pack had passed him, the slender man flashing him a victorious, caustic smile as he did. He really got a lot of people's attention while he was doing this, by the way. Like, a lot of people sort of looked around and were like, the fuck is this guy doing? Is he beating them? But the whole thing, in the end, when Naomi comes up to him and is like, what was that? He's like, what do you mean? The way they went fast? And Naomi's like, well, yeah, that. I mean, I didn't even sense them ignite. And Scorio's like, I didn't either. Nice run, said Scorio, giving them a chin up as they walked by. Someone made a soft, scoffing sound, but Scorio didn't see who. Jova and Ravenna simply stared at him, not with hostility, but something akin to indifference. It made him feel small and cold, and he was glad when they'd walked past the group and out into the intersecting hall. And what was that about? Simple, said Naomi. They're the top predators of the school. You tried to threaten their dominance, they crushed you, as was right, and now you're a nobody to them again. No, worse than a nobody. An upstart nobody. That's how it works? Well, I hope they enjoy owning the roost while they can. I'm coming for them. Give yourself a few months of ingesting the best elixirs and pills the Academy has to offer, along with whatever their house sponsorships give them. Then make Emberling, and maybe you'll develop the reserves and strength they've got. That's what's going on? It's the rule of the Academy. The best get the greatest rewards. That the weak are left to fight over scraps. The meritocracy system is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yo, that's a fucking sermon, though. And it really is so backward. It really, really is, you guys. Like, you know, don't get me started. I've said this shit enough already. You know where I stand on all of that. But yeah, Scorio is just like, well, I guess I've got a new challenge. And she's like, well, you needed something to kill yourself over, I guess. So have at it. I love Leonis. It's fiendish. The faster you run, the more time you have to bathe and eat. Whereas we poor souls who are built like champions, built like what? Asked Leonshi innocently. Built like mighty oxen and not meant to race about like fleet-footed deer. Can I call you that? Mighty ox? Scorio, save me from this harridan, begged Leonis. I really am living for all of them just being together at school. I know this can only last so long. I'm sure it's going to get blown up in like the next section. But right now, it is everything I want. This is like, I mentioned this in an episode of the coverage of Suki that I do with Miles. But that's a patrons only show for those who are interested. $5 and up, covering all the Suki Stackhouse books, which is what True Blood is based on. And they're super fun. And we were talking about, quote, filler episodes in TV shows. And I was saying how filler episodes are some of my personal favorites because I am all about characters over plot. And filler episodes tend to be when we just get our characters hanging out, acting ridiculous, doing stupid shit that has nothing to do with anything. And we get to just see how they interact with each other in a relaxed setting when there aren't huge stakes. And that is what particularly fascinates me. And this is like, it feels like a filler episode, but I don't mean that at all in a bad way. It's just that we are actually getting to hang out with them. And I'm going to savor this as much as I can because I know it can't last. I have, oh my God, I just saw Dan in the chat says, God damn it, I can't tell you my nickname for this series, best character, but the first word is horny. Oh boy, I'm very interested in finding out. I am going to stop here. I haven't finished my coverage of 44. As I was reading 44, I was like, this is a really long chapter. And yeah, I am like slightly over time at this point. But I think the best way to divide this up is I'm going to start talking about their classes and their teachers that they meet and how that all goes at the start of the next episode. And that way it will just sort of divide cleanly because I feel like it won't take that long to talk about, but I do think that second half of this chapter feels like the start of a new chapter, even though it's all part of 44. And I think that since I had to start late today because I underread, I don't have the flexibility to keep going over time the way that I sometimes do. So I'm going to go over time next time, more than likely. And that's fine. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed this section. I'm going to look forward to talking about the classes as well, because that's more of them hanging out. And I'm just really enjoying this book. I really, really am. I don't know. I don't remember, Dan, if you've told me how many there are so far in the series. I don't think you've commissioned the second one yet, but This book is also longer than I expect. Like, I keep thinking that I'm nearing the end, and we're only at the halfway point. So there's a lot left, and I'm looking forward to seeing where we go. All right, I am going to wrap up. Thank you guys again so much for listening, and I hope you're enjoying the coverage. Until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.